Forum meeting, Wednesday, 15th January at 4:32. We are live streaming, so we are caught here. So we have hopefully been broadcast to and hopefully streamed, certainly being recorded. It's being conducted in accordance to the Council Remote Meetings Protocol and Procedures. In the meeting, please use chat to indicate if you want to speak, or raise your hand. We have that option because there's lots of things that we talk about. Please do. Thank you. Please do mute your microphones when you're not speaking, because it just stops that horrible squeal. Nobody needs that. And then you can turn your cameras off if you want to, but sometimes the sound and picture breaks up if you leave your camera on. So sometimes that resolves the meeting, the need on it. And then for voting, it'll be by general assent. Please try and use the thumbs up function. So that's under your buttons. It says react, and mine happens to be set at the heart function. Of course, we will accept both hearts and thumbs up. If you can find anything else positive to indicate, or you can have a negative one as well, but try and indicate. And if we really can't see where the device is, then Jamie will pop the element to vote into the chat, and then people can respond straight after. But we thought that might make it easier to make a roll of who's voted which way, especially as the meeting's being recorded as well. So Jamie, I know I asked this question off screen, but do we have any apologies for absence or substitute members?
I've received apologies from Gareth Croxon, Juanita Dunlop, Grant Strudley and Sue Butler, and I believe Andrew Stevens is here in Sue Butler's place as a substitute.
And welcome. And welcome to all the other members of council who've joined us as well, all the members who are working in Brackwell. So I don't think there are any obvious declarations to declare, but I'm always interested if people want to disclose pecuniary interest or affected interest in respect to things we're talking about today. But if any member wants to disclose anything that they feel is of interest to them, now's the time to do it. Thank you very much. Right, we're straight on to agenda item 3, which is to approve as to correct the record of the minutes that we had on the 5th of December 2024. So if I go down, and then we'd agreed from last time that actions would be agreed as we go through. So we're starting on page 3 out of there. So looking through the minutes, Dwayne, you've got an action on the very first page. And Dwayne, your action, if you could just give us an update on that one. You'll need to unmute, my dear. There we go.
Sorry, yeah, that's been done. That action's been completed. The local offer's been shared out with all the SENCOs and all the head teachers. Is also in the Can-Do website. I'm acutely aware the next action's me as well, Chair. So in terms of the next action, that's been collated now and will be sent out to schools as well. So
really helpful. So, and then scrolling down, I don't think there are any more actions. There's lots of things that we agreed last time. And today we've got lots of things to agree again. So let's go to agenda item 4, which starts on page 7 of it. And then Cherry, are you presenting this one?
I am, Liz.
So, well, happy New Year. Tell us about the sufficiency. So for those people.
So item number 4 is our childcare sufficiency assessment. We have to do an annual sufficiency assessment and publish it. So it's something that comes to Forum each year. This year has been interesting. Because we're obviously in the middle of the rollout of all the new entitlements. So this sufficiency report goes until the summer term. It's a little bit later coming to you for various reasons. But obviously what we've had to look at with this report is, as well as what our current capacity was during the last year, what we need to do for the coming year with the entitlements increasing up until next September. So the paper really is for information, and obviously everybody, if you've got any questions, please ask. But some of the key, I'm just going to pick out a couple of the key things from the paper that goes alongside the report, is that based on our capacity that we had in the summer and what we sort of know with all our projections we're doing and the significant report that we've done around our rollout of the expansions, there may be a shortfall of around 542 early years childcare places next September, which is quite significant because we've not experienced a shortfall of childcare places. And when I'm talking childcare here, I'm talking the early years childcare. We'll talk a little bit about wraparounds in a minute. But because due to the expansion of the free entitlements for our under threes, which from September 24 extended for 15 hours for children from the term after they were 9 months up until 3, and then from next September it goes to 30 hours for those children as well. So doing lots and lots, there's been a lot of work going on around looking at our data and what it's all telling us. So that's our current prediction of places that we need. But to counteract that, we've got lots of projects, which I'll touch on in a minute. With our school age children, our wraparound for school age, the data doesn't really indicate a shortfall because parents are reporting minimal issues accessing childcare. And from our school's point of view, school colleagues that are on the call, pretty much all schools are offering that wraparound care. And I know that some of the people on the call are involved with us in expanding that provision as well. And hopefully you've had letters this week around that expansion. But from our point of view, talking to other colleagues in other areas, we've not had the shortfall in the wraparound as some other authorities have, but we're working on that as well. So our key things really for 25-26 is continuing to collaborate with all of our existing providers and new providers. We've currently got 3 projects that are with our planning colleagues. So we're working close with planning at the moment with some new, quite exciting sort of full day care opportunities hopefully coming into Bracknell, which will really help with that shortfall of places. The shortfall really is for those under threes. We don't appear to have a significant deficit in 3+. We've got a lot of provision for those children. What we are lacking a little bit for the younger children is some of that more wraparound care, that before, after school and holiday time. But again, we're working with a few providers who are looking at increasing their operational hours to incorporate that. It's the whole initiative is obviously being promoted nationally as childcare support for working families, but the majority of families aren't working 9 till 3, 38 weeks of the year. So we have to look at that whole wraparound. So it's been a really interesting year looking at sufficiency, and I think the next few months will continue to be interesting. But yeah, I don't know if anybody's got any specific questions that they'd like to ask about the report as it is and the actions that we've identified. I suppose the only other action really to comment on is childcare for children with SEND. That does seem to be a little bit more challenging. However, we've not got sufficient data yet. So I have reached out to our Parent Carer Forum to work on that. And we've also had some contact with a colleague in Wokingham. And so we might be hoping to look at doing something in partnership with colleagues in Wokingham as well around childcare for children with SEND. So any questions, really?
Thank you very much. Colleagues, over to you. Anyone like to ask Sherry any questions? Thank you. So Sherry, that's received. I think there's not any comments from us. My only thought was that sounds like a lot of work being put into review, and it's very interesting that that there's 542. Are you saying it's mainly the 2-year-olds that we say we have?
Well, it's mainly the younger children, so the under threes, which could be from 9 months to 3. So obviously we currently do have some full daycare providers across the local authority, but with the increase, and I think although a lot of the children are already in childcare, now that there is that funding to support families, more families are looking to use more formal childcare, whereas some of them were perhaps using informal childcare prior to this, or they're increasing their working hours because they can get some more childcare funded. I won't say free because it's never free, but you know, that is supporting them with their childcare costs. So yeah, definitely under threes are the gap in our market at the moment.
So thank you to the team for a well received and a well written report. So
Thank you.
sufficiency. Then we are going all the way down. I think we come back to you as well, Cherry. After
We do.
and it's a very comprehensive report. So I keep
Yes.
going down. We're past page 21. Okay.
It's page 31, Liz. I've just scrolled down to it. So item number 5.
My notes, I would have spotted that. 31. Okay, hopefully some people would be ahead of me. So we're on to 31. So the proposals for the early years block budget, and there are a few recommendations that we'll do line by line at the end. So hopefully there'll be time for people to comment on thoughts.
Yes, there are. So for those of you that were at Forum in December, we brought through our proposals for what the formula would look like. At that point, we hadn't had our allocation from the DFE, so we weren't able to bring you any monetary bits to the budget there. So that's what this one is doing. So we're looking at the rates of funding. Sorry, I'm just trying to scroll down and it's not letting me. One of the changes that I wanted to highlight from December was around the early years budget grant, which is the 24-25 part of the grant. So currently, following sort of re-looking at that, we'd looked in December around that allocated budget going out to all hours delivered to 3 and 4-year-olds. However, when we walked away from it and looked at it in more detail, that money was really intended to support the teachers' pay and conditions. So we wanted to bring it back to this forum to say, actually, although that's what we'd sort of agreed in principle in the December budget, we'd like to change that, and that money, that 69,000, will be distributed to our eligible school-based providers who have delivered those hours. So it's a slight change from what we suggested in December. So that was something really to highlight to you. So that's being proposed in this this paper, and we will then be looking at calculations during the spring term, and then after the spring actual task has been processed, then that money will come out to those settings that are eligible for that to cover the autumn and the spring terms. So apologies for the change in that, but hopefully for school colleagues on the call, that's a positive change for them because it means the money's coming into their schools. So all of the proposals put forward are, as you can see, there's so many different elements of the early years block budget now. So whereas we had, previously 3 and 4-year-olds, and then our targeted 2-year-olds, so those more vulnerable 2-year-olds, we've now got the 3 and 4-year-olds, the universal, the working families, the targeted 2-year-olds, and then working families for the under 3s. But there are 2 different rates of pay for that. So it's been quite a complicated budget, and there's been a lot of time spent sort of during the Christmas period in working out how this budget should be used and allocating the amounts to the formulas. It also covers the early years pupil premium grant, the disability access fund, and then the special educational needs inclusion fund that we manage in-house that comes back out to the settings dependent on the needs of the children. So it's quite a big, more complicated budget than perhaps we've had to manage previously. So the changes are all in the tables on pages 33. So I'm just trying to get down to the ones that will be the most interesting to you. Obviously, our total income has increased significantly. If we go back a couple of years, we were probably bringing in around 8 to 9 million in the early years block, and as you can see now, it's 23 plus, or that's our estimate of what's going to be coming in. Right, let me scrolling down. So we talked last time about changes to the way we were looking at our deprivation rates and using the deprivation supplement So £1 for the deprivation supplement and £1 from EYPP funding. And that was the principle was agreed. So this is sort of showing the monetary amounts with that. Bear with me as I move on down. There are a couple of changes around. We're looking at, because we've had more income coming in, we now can centrally retain 4% of that budget, but it's 4% of a bigger budget. But with all of the considerations as a council and the high needs block, we're looking at offsetting some of the child development centre costs through the early years block rather than the high needs block. So that's in the paper as well. So getting down to the proposals for the hourly rates, I think is the key thing. So our funding, what we're suggesting for our 3 and 4 year olds is £6.30 per hour as the base rate, and then the eligible for EYPP is another £1 on top of that. Then for our younger children, our 2 year olds would be £9.02 per funded hour, eligible for EYPP £1, but then an additional £1 on top of that for our targeted 2 year olds, because they often do cause a little bit more work for some of our settings. So that's the they need to be paid at least the same amount. And one of our concerns for our target 2 year olds is we've always had a really good, I think we're about 88% of our eligible targeted 2 year olds accessing the funding. But with the working parent allocation for 2 year olds, our concern was if there wasn't an incentive to take the targeted 2 year olds, we may lose places for them. So it's an added incentive for those children that most need that place to have a place. And then for our under 2s, it's £12.31 per hour, and the same with the EYPP on top of that. However, for some of these younger children, they are less likely to be entitled to EYPP. Some will, but because the premise is that for the under 3s, most of those children will be of working parents, less are likely to be entitled to EYPP, although some will be. Sorry, that's probably a bit complicated. You can see in 5.20 there is the sort of what people are going to see as an increase. There are no losers in the allocations, which is always a good thing. But you can see the percentage. Oh, no, there are a couple of losers. There are a couple that will see a decrease in their income, but the majority of people will see an increase in their income. Paul, have I missed anything out of that?
No, I think that's very thorough, Cherry. Thank you.
So, questions?
Appreciate that. So let's go to comments and questions. I should declare in interest I have a nursery. Do you think that's a reasonable thing? But it's good to hear comments, thoughts and questions on what Cherry has just comprehensively presented. I'll start. I think the work that you had to do to then think about the teaching funding hours, I know it was one of the sticking points of contention we had last time. Obviously, having that back in is a relief to the school community, but or PVIs, how are they negatively impacted by that? Are they
no
distribution graph in 5.2 where there's 7 people see a decrease of either 1 or 2%?
I mean, off the top of my head, Liz, I can't tell you who the decreases are at the moment, and I have to say, you know, a lot of this work has been completed by David from my team. You know, I'm not going to take the credit for this. It's some, you know, significant work between him, and obviously we've worked with Paul on it as well. But yeah, I can't tell you off the top of my head who they are.
Thank you. Okay. So my other thought was the 4% council's central retention. Is there a guidance from government on what we're allowed to retain? Is that something within our powers for
Yes, so up until this year, we have been allowed to centrally retain 5% of the early years block.
Okay.
This year, they have decreased it to 4%. So we are centrally retaining the most we can at the moment, and utilising that to support providers, like I said, with the Child Development Centre, which I know is very well received by our provider base. We are going to offset some of those costs, which will help then the high needs block. Next year, as far as we're aware, the intention is that the central retention will decrease to 3%. But again, with the 30 hours coming in from September, we should get more income again. So it's just managing it, but we will be retaining the amount that we're allowed to.
Okay, but my question is, will you be able to function? Obviously, going from 5% to 4% to 3%. Actually, we've always said we want to support the youngest and most vulnerable, and it's so lovely to hear about the targeted children being a priority to incentivise. But out of that £23 million that you now get, and it had increased from 8 before, will your team be able to function on 4% next year?
Yes, at the moment, yes, we have managed it, and we continue to work in partnership with David from my team and with Dwayne to look at what our priorities are, and ensuring that we can still cover the work that we need to. So we're not concerned at this point, Liz.
Right, any other comments from colleagues? No, okay, so let's go to recommendations. So, Rachel, hello.
Hi, sorry. The 7 providers who are going to have a decrease, has there been any consideration of the impact of that on their provision?
Not specifically, no.
And do we know why there's going to be a decrease? I mean, is that decrease going to result in provisions closing potentially and then having an impact further on?
I don't think it will make a difference. I don't think it will cause closure. I think part of this, the conversation that we've had, is that for those providers, there has been, with the way deprivation was working, and the quality supplement, it's due to those two combined changes in the formula. What I would say, and I say to all of you here, really, really please encourage your parents to sign the form that you can check if they're eligible for early years pupil premium. We're convinced that we still have children that would be eligible for that who are not receiving it, because you have to get the parents' consent for us to check. Once they've agreed, we can keep checking those children. So if they come up as ineligible the first time, they just keep going through the system. So if circumstances change for that family, it will automatically be highlighted, and that will increase the provider's hourly amount for that child. So it's a significant amount of money for you. I would really promote that.
On that subject, is there a way to promote that generally within Bracknell Forest? Because I know many parents see pupil premium, for example, as being free school meals. And if they don't feel that they want that, then they don't feel the need. They don't appreciate there's extra funding. So is there a way we could perhaps do some kind of marketing generally to bring that knowledge, even if we send out some Bracknell Forest marketing to all schools and get it to send it out in newsletters?
We can do some more. I mean, we certainly have done that in the past, but I can take it back to the team and we can definitely do that again. We're keen for the money to be out there for those children that really, really need it. So, we're happy to support you with that. So I can take that back to the team.
Rachel, great questions. Richard, you've had your hand up fleetingly. Has it been answered?
Yes, and also just not a question, but a comment. Just that I felt whilst reading the papers and listening to Cherry's presentation, I feel that it's a complicated issue, and a lot of thought and consideration seems to have gone through to try and get this right. And I just wanted to share. I felt that there's a team of people working very hard to try and get what is a very complicated system right for the children of Bracknell. So just thanks for that.
Thank you, Richard. Much appreciated.
What's rapidly changed for your team this year? So
significantly. I mean, just based on the headcount, just for your information, looking at the headcount from the autumn term, we had to process almost double the amount of funded children in the autumn term as we had last autumn. So it's been a significant amount of work, but for all of you as well as us. So thank you.
So let's go to our recommendations. So the school forum consists of the early years budget proposal from the council and agrees. So we're going to go for one first. The early years budget grant to 2024-2025 is allocated to eligible schools as set out in points 5.1 to 5.6. Thumbs up, or oh, we've got some thumbs. Brilliant, too. Okay, I'll put mine up. There we go. Thank you. So let's go for 2.2. So 2.2i. So that the 2025-26 financial year, the executive members for children and young people and learning sets that the early years educated school grant is an income budget at 23.689 million, and that's in table 2. Brilliant, thank you very much. So the funding rates, this is point 2, the funding rates in the early years funding formula are set out as tables 3, 4 and 5. Give me some thumbs up, either in person or use your thumbs up function. Thank you very much. And that the proposals for the budgets are set out in Annex 1. Thank you very much, Cherry. All those recommendations passed.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure I'll be here again, and definitely next year for the next budget. So thank you all very much for your time.
Let's move down to Paul. Just scrolling. This time I can read my page numbers. We're on page 43. So Paul, you're going to tell us about the proposals for the local authority budget from the Executive Director and Resources team. Need to unmute, my dear.
Thought I did. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Chair. That's good at that. Yes, thank you. This is just to confirm this is an annual paper and it's part of the council's formal consultation process on its 25-26 budget proposals, and it covers both capital and revenue. So there's a whole set of proposals across the council, but this paper has actually got a particular focus on the likely impacts on the People Directorate. So that's the directorate that covers education and learning, children's services, and adult social care in the main, plus early help. So that's the focus of this paper. As per usual, in terms of getting the budget planning together in a timely manner, these proposals have come out before the government has finalised the financial settlement for local authorities. So a number of estimates have been and assumptions have had to be made around likely levels of income, that sort of thing. But obviously, as I say, to get that planning going through and to give an idea of what sort of budget changes the council is looking at, this consultation has come out now. So seeking comments back from the schools forum. And just to quickly run through the main parts of this paper. So if I just concentrate on the revenue budget to start with. So there are 5 main parts to the revenue budget. So the first part would be our commitment budget. So what are we committed to pay for already? What is rolling forward our service is going to cost next year? But also looking at that, whether there are any other impacts that are going to change our current spend base based on previous budget decisions. So some of the budget decisions in 24-25 may have been a part year cost because they came in September, for example. So for 25-26, there may be a bigger cost or a reduction. So the commitment budget wraps all those things up together. And for the People Directorate, there's a very small reduction of £8,000 next year. And if you want to see the breakdown of those particular elements of that commitment budget, that's in Annex A. Second part to talk about is actual government grants and other income. So council services obviously funded mainly through government grants and council tax and business rates. There's been a number of significant grants that we received, mainly the revenue support grant that is there to fund specific services, but there's also general social care grants. So estimates have been made around how much income we're going to get to be able to actually finance the planned expenditure. Then I take together service pressures and developments and economy. So this is the main part of where we're looking at moving priorities around, setting budgets at different levels than they are at the moment. And in total across the council, there's £8.5 million worth of pressures and £5.3 million worth of economies. So we're talking about a £3.2 million overall net pressure for 25-26. And if you look at the People Directorate, there's around £6 million worth of pressures and £4.2 million worth of economy. So a £1.8 million net pressure in those services. So what we tend to concentrate on is looking at what the statutory roles, the demographic changes, what our policies to determine. So a lot of these changes actually just resizing budgets to carry on what we're doing at the moment. Obviously, there are some refinements within that. And some of the main pressures I would highlight in terms of the education and learning services. There is a proposal to increase the education psychology service and to also provide permanent funding for the Safeguarding Our Schools manager, which is a temporary funded post at the moment. Plus, there's expected to be additional costs for home to school transport. So those are built in as the main pressures, and you can see the pressures at Annex B, and you can see the economies at Annex C. And then the final part of the building up the revenue budget for the council is to make a provision for cost increases next year. So for an inflation provision, so looking at how much pay awards are going to increase, other contracts, etc. And the estimate is around a £3.8 million cost provision for that. So as I say, based on the information we have at this point in time, and before we would look at changes to the council tax level, there would be a shortfall of between planned spend and planned income of £3.1 million, and the way that that can be that gap can be eliminated is through a number of either any of these or a combination of an increase in the council tax, take some money out of the council's reserve, so there's some money set aside for potential requirements going forward, and we could also be looking at making further savings or reductions to service pressures. So that's a summary of the revenue budget. I don't know if it's worth just looking at that first and then coming back to capital, because there are two very straightforward recommendations. I don't know if you want to do it that way, Chair, or should I just carry on through capital as well?
I think let's go for breaking it down into the two pieces.
Okay, okay.
So as Paul has indicated, there is a gap, and then we need to be making comments on the ideas for generating revenues and the savings in there, because if we can't close that gap, or the council, it ends up with council tax, or working on building down on those reserves, or identifying more savings in there. So let's have some comments on especially Annex A and Annex B, please. Are these the right things? Keith, please do start us off.
Yeah, I expect I'm speaking on behalf of everyone. So I think for the record, we ought to state concern that there's more pressure overall here. And that's a big concern for me going forward, I think, as someone who works within this local authority.
Thank you very much, Keith. Anybody want to follow on with that? Specific points that we think, having looked on A and B, absolutely echo. So my thoughts was on the education and learning service. So if we go to page, I think it's 62, Paul, that you've labelled it up. You just talk us through that element there, education and learning services. Okay, so page 63 shows all of the pressures that are being put forward by the People Directorate. So if you scroll down to page 64, you'll see there's a couple of items towards the bottom there. So the bottom two lines are headed up support to vulnerable pupils. That sets out the education psychology and the Safeguarding Our Schools manager. And then the bottom line talks about the additional cost to the home to school transport service. So we're going to put in another 110,000 to support educational psychology in school, and more money for the homeschool transport. Yeah. My comment was around one of the efficiencies. So if you go to page 62, it says education and learning services. So just talk us through the how we got that 79,000 change in there. Do you want me to come in there, Paul? Yeah, sure. Please do, Dwayne. That'll be your services. Yeah, so in terms of that 79,000, that's been split over 2 academic years. And what we did, we didn't take anything out of the services. We just right-sized one of the budgets that was never being spent, and that was round our needs children. So the budget was quite significant. For quite a few years, that hadn't been spent. So we just right-sized that budget and obviously put that forward in as a saving. The other thing we've done is looked at some of the school standards
standards and effectiveness in terms of the delivery of the service level agreements around trading. So we know that some of our trading services are going down, and what we've done is over the 3-year period where we've been sort of tied into service level agreements, what we know is at the end of them service level agreements, schools are not buying in that SLA. So what we did then is reduce and put forward a saving against our budget. But at this moment in time, it hasn't made a significant difference to staffing levels. What it did do really, the majority of that saving that was put forward was to right-size budgets that hadn't been previously spent.
Thank you very much. So let's go for voting on that recommendation and then come back to the capital one, because otherwise, I don't know about you on 4:30. I can't keep the threads in my brain. So recommendations that the Schools Forum comments on the budget proposals for the revenue budget. Has anyone else got any other comments they would like to make on the revenue budget? No? Okay. Paul, could you talk us through the capital?
Yeah, that'd be a lot quicker conversation. That will.
I am very worried about this because we're moving in one direction. I'm surprised there haven't been more comments that have been made this afternoon about this report, which I studied and I read through twice. If we keep moving in this direction, this doesn't just affect LA maintained schools, this affects everybody. This affects everybody who works in Bracknell Forest. This affects everybody who works with children and families who live in Bracknell Forest. And the local authority cannot be expected to keep cutting and cutting and cutting, because it will impact on all of us, whether we work in academies or LA maintained schools, or indeed for other services providing for young people and families and other adults in the borough. This cannot keep moving in this direction. We're trying to do more with less and less and less. It doesn't add up.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you so much. So anyone else want to add some more thoughts on this, because that is what we are commenting on? Trudy.
I mean, I echo what Keith and Richard have said previously, and yourself, Liz. I sort of suspect that there are very limited opportunities. And I also heard what Dwayne said regarding the NEET funding. So am I right in thinking that this money has just been shifted to offset other expenses? And so this has enabled us to have more EPs. Am I right in thinking that? Because when I looked at it, I thought, well, that's a positive. But I also hear that we are trying to do more with less. But I don't know what the answer to that is. But, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, Trudy, I can come in on that. So yeah, absolutely. So if I've got, if I'm looking at my service areas and I'm aware we got workshops next week, what I'm looking, if I'm looking to request staff in one area, then I look at all my budgets to see if there's anything I can do to offset that pressure. And one of the things that I was able to do, and that's why I can say categorically is not affected staffing levels, is that I was able to look at the NEET budget, and that was set, in terms of the size of the authority we are. There was a really significant budget that was set at that time, and then rather than keep that budget and not spend it, I've obviously offset that and said, okay, if I sacrifice this, that gives me the sort of opportunity to increase that. So my request sort of in the budget set and almost balances out, if that makes sense to you. So in all fairness, when I looked at the pressures, they hadn't been spent for years, and I just almost shifted it into a different part of the service. In saying that, times are hard, and I'm not going to sort of dress that up any other way. And we do have decisions that need to be made in terms of our spend, and for the size of authority we are as well. So yeah.
So with regard, because I also heard Cherry saying about the CDC, the Child Development Centre is being able to stay, which obviously is critical for our early years leading into schools, also our SEND children. So I heard that right, didn't I? That's not going to close. We're not going to lose that.
No, we're not going to lose it, you know. And to be honest, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we're not going to lose it.
No.
What we're looking at is how it is structurally funded, to be
Fine.
honest with you. And if the, you know, it is for the early years children, Trudy, and if the early years sector is getting more money in, then we can take one pressure off one block and assign it to a different block, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And that's exactly what
I
I'm
just
doing.
wanted to make sure I was hearing it right, because I felt awful sitting silently, but at the same time, as Keith rightly points out, it's hard to keep doing this good provision with less money, but we're all having to do that, I guess. So it's just.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, what we are doing as well is, you know, we need to make sure that whatever we delivering is giving us the impact we need. And you know, as you know, we all have to watch our pennies. So making value for money is critical for us now. But, you know, I have no intentions. It's not on the agenda to close. It is about saying, how can we deliver this through different funding? And also, how can we deliver it in a more cost effective as well as impactful way for our little ones.
Thank you.
I've got 2 more comments that I've forgotten to talk about. So if we go to Annex B, first one, Paul, there are lots of noughts in 26-27. Is that we have no idea what we're going to be potentially having as an impact for, because these are some big numbers, so children are looked after costs.
You're quite. Some of the larger ones, because they're so volatile, changeable, we don't try and project too far forward on those bigger ones. It's usually those services where you might have restructured partway through the year and it's quite definite what's happening. So, you know, you've done the change from September and there's going to be a different impact in the next year because it's got 12 months. So you've got a part year in one year and a part year in the next, and then it settles down. But some of these other bigger budgets, it's proved to be very difficult to project accurately more than one. Well, it's difficult to project one year into the future, to be quite honest, on some of these things. So it's not an exercise we try to do.
I'm just thinking with a lot of these descriptions about the volatility of it. I'm not trying to try to make things harder for you, but maybe a little bit further into it, just to try and see where we can get pressures. Because if we've got a 3 million variation on adult social care, and these are in addition to what we've got already, and if we've got a pattern over the last couple of years, for a look back to last paper, there were policies. Where can we have predictable scale up of numbers?
Yeah. I mean that work does go in the background. It's just not something that comes into the budget paper. So we are forward planning, if that's what you're asking.
Yes.
Definitely. It's just that even as we go through the financial year, if we look at our forecasts sort of every quarter, they can change significantly through things that, you know, you just can't predict. You know, you have a particularly high cost case comes along, or you lose some funding from partners, something like that. It can have an impact on your cost base that you just weren't anticipating.
And then there was a line on 63, support to disabled children. That is very welcome too. I know will make an impact to parents. So changes proposed increased number of provision at Larchbrook for the short break. That is going to be very welcome to help some triage some of the support we need. So thank you. If there's no more comments, let's move on to Paul for the economies, please.
Sorry, can I just check, Chair? Do you actually want to make a formal comment on the revenue proposals back to Council? Is that something? I don't want to put words in your mouth as a forum, but there's been comments made here. Are you wanting us to take everything that Jamie's written down by individual members, or is it a collective? This is what the forum's saying.
I think a collective piece. If we could see that before it goes to.
Okay. So if we send that to you, Liz, yeah, is that something? Okay. All right. Okay. But thank you. Thanks for that clarification. That's very good. Thank you. Okay. Right. Okay. On the capital, I said that's a much smaller introduction. So this is just focusing on our investments in the. I don't know if Rachel's got her hand up. I don't know if is that a current comment?
Sorry, just following on from what Liz said, where you've put zeros in, where we aren't able to predict figures, would it be more appropriate to put NA or something instead of 0? So that we're aware it's not actually 0, it's just something that we haven't got a figure for at the moment. Otherwise, it kind of makes the figures look wonky, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. Yeah, obviously this is a council-wide report, so I can feed that back to the Director of Finance and see what his views are on that. But yeah, I'll take that comment back. It's definitely something to think about. Thank you. Okay, back to the capital then. So the capital is, let's say, it's about our investments, mainly around properties, and there's a summary annex. Is probably, if there's anything you want to look at, that's probably the main thing to look at, and that's on page 67. Overall, this is just the People Directorate element of the programme, but overall the council's looking to fund 8.38 million pounds worth of capital investment from borrowing, and there's 4.3 million pound from external income. But in terms of the People Directorate, that's at Annex D, so there's some investment around housing property, and there's also towards the bottom of that slide of that page you can see there's some investments around school maintenance and basic needs grant, which is extra places if those are required. And then the page 68 just sets out a bit more detail of exactly what those schemes are there intended to do. So as I say, there's not a lot really to say there. There's not anywhere near the scale of the programmes there is on the revenue side of it, but those are the proposals for investment at this point in time. So I don't think there's anything else for me to add to that. Thank you very much.
Any comments in respect to the capital programme? Nobody. That's fine. So thank you very much. So Paul, if you could, Jamie, if you could try and combine what we've been saying, and then pass it to myself and to Jenny as vice, and we'll have a look at we want them to pass forward to the People's Directorate. Okay, thank you very much. So are we okay to move on to the last paper? Am I right, Paul? Is it the last paper?
It's the last paper, yeah. Agenda item 7, the 25-26 proposals for the schools block and central schools services block budgets. So again, this is the annual paper, the final paper that comes to you with proposals for 25-26 budgets that directly affect yourselves and the services that support schools. So there's a lot of information in the paper. There's a lot of table, a lot of figures, obviously. So what I'll just focus on really, I think, is the executive summary, which sets out on page 69 there, and then see if there's any questions after that. So basically, we've had some earlier decisions, some earlier information has come to the forum, and like the early years block budget, we've just had an absence of knowing what the actual money was looking like. So we have all that together now. So there's no real changes in terms of how we're proposing to pull the budget together. It's just putting that money behind the decisions that were the previously agreed at the schools forum. Much of that, as you'll be aware, has been driven by the October 2024 school census, of which we got that data from the DfE on the 17th of January, so just before the Christmas break. So just running through a few things as a reminder from the last meeting as well, where we talked about we knew roughly what our uplift in council funding is to pass on to schools. So that's set out in paragraph 1, 2.31, where we see there's an overall 8% increase in per pupil funding, and that's broken down into 3 different elements. So 7.2% is actually moving money out of specific grant payments you received in 24-25. So they weren't part of your main budget, but they are moving into your main budget in 25-26, and you'll no longer get that funding paid to you separately. So moving that from one funding stream to another increases the funding that you get through your school's budget by 7.2%. There's also some lagged funding, some of the data that funds schools, particularly around additional educational needs, which is things like deprivation measures and low prior attainment. They're funded on a lag basis. So those measures have been increasing for a number of years now, but the funding takes a year to catch up. So our funding has increased by about 0.2% to reflect those increases in needs as well into 25-26. And then the final element of the change is a 0.6% uplift in the general funding rates to cover cost pressure increases in 25-26. So that's the money that's come out from the DfE. It's also, as I mentioned last time, there will be separate funding in year for the employer contribution increases to the National Insurance Scheme. We haven't got the details of how that will work yet, but for planning for now. Schools should assume that whatever costs come through, then that income will cover that. But obviously only time will tell on that. And then running through some of the information that came out of the census, there has been a small increase in pupil numbers. So they've gone up by 46 in the year, which is 0.3% of an increase, as I say. So that's quite a small increase. There has been a small reduction in primary, and then that's offset by an increase in secondary and a net increase overall. As I touched on in that element about the DfE funding rates, looking from so that was picking up from 23-24 to 24-25 budget. If we look now at the 25-26 budget and the change from the additional educational needs measures that have come through at the October census, they have again increased from previous years. So there are extra allocations to pay out to schools from those measures, but there's no money in the budget to pay for them from the DfE, so we're not able to pass on full funding for those changes. But some of it is going to be funded, but we can't fully fund it because it's not in the funding system yet for local authorities. So if you look at all the measures that are in the budget, they're set out in more detail in the following pages. We're looking at an overall increase in like-for-like per pupil funding of 0.8%. So that is basically, if you look at the moment I talk about the breakdown of the increase in DfE funding, that's the increase in the AEN measures and the increase for price increases in 25-26. Also, just to confirm that the block transfer has obviously been recalculated, but again, it's capped at 0.5% for individual schools. And this time, the calculation does include those schools that are funded at the minimum amount that the DfA would normally allow schools to be funded at. So there's all schools are now making a contribution to that transfer. And there's also some transfer of some of the centrally retained school grants as well. So it's not just about money from individual schools. And as a reminder, as last year, some of those decisions in terms of the funding transfer have to be signed off by the Secretary of State. So we're not anticipating any difficulties with those, but the timing of those is after this paper has been brought to the schools forum. We probably won't hear from those until February. So there's still a bit of uncertainty around some of these proposals are coming through, but we don't expect there to be any significant discrepancies when those decisions come through. So those are the main parts that the council has proposed. There's also elements within the setting this budget that are directly a decision making for the schools forum. So that the key areas there are those centrally retained budgets that we're proposing. So there's a couple of those. There's one set out at recommendation 3.3.2, which is about the amount of the growth fund. And then there's also one recommendation 3.33, which is about those budgets that are centrally managed by the council for some of the services that support both academies and maintain schools that don't get delegated out into individual school budgets. So that's basically looking at those two budgets that come out to schools, essentially the main delegated budgets and also those centrally retained services. There's also a very brief update on the high needs block budget. Obviously, we've talked before about we're still working through plans on that. There are some engagement sessions planned for the next few weeks with schools and other stakeholders to get a clear steer on the sort of areas that you want developed for the high needs block budgets, and then that will feed into budget proposals that come out to you again in March. So again, there's coming out quite late, but that does again reflect the fact that we've got late funding settlements from the DfE, and we have had to look at a lot more work about the impact of our changes this year and what we can do into next year. So we do need to do some more engagement with stakeholders. So I think that basically covers off the introduction I'd like to give tonight. So I don't know if there are any comments or questions.
So let's, if when you're commenting a question, if there's any chance you can link it to anything in the executive summary, that'd be helpful. But let's start with just comments and questions before we get going. Keith, let's start with you, please.
Thank you, Liz. Paul, I have emailed you about this, but given what you've also said in your presentation, could you please clarify your statement in 2.5 and just give a bit of background and context exactly where those figures are arrived at, how they're arrived at, please? You're on mute, Paul.
That's twice today. Sorry about that. I can't actually see them. It's below my bar when I'm looking at whether it's on or not. So apologies for that, but that's my excuse anyway. Yeah, so the per pupil funding rate comes out from the DfE each year to the local authority, and that's the amount of money obviously we can afford to pass on to schools. And the DfE provide information about how that money has changed between different years, and the information they've published shows They've moved a certain amount of those grants from one funding stream into another funding stream, so moving it from one to another. Although that gives you more cash, it doesn't give you any more spending power. Effectively, it lets you continue to meet those costs that you have funded from a different funding stream. And then there's two elements of the financial settlement that do give you some more money to cover your costs into the next year that you haven't got this year, and that relates to the extra measures in deprivation and low prior attainment. So some of that money gets passed through, it's on a lag basis, and that's equivalent to a 0.2% increase in funding from 24-25. And then there's an actual a general 0.6% uplift to the 24-25 funding rates that the DfE use to cover increases in cost pressures into 25-26. So overall, there's 0.8% in the funding settlement on average to cover cost pressures into 25-26. Is that clarifying it, Keith?
I don't know if that's helping me. So when I started reading this paper, I went back to the report that the IFS released last week, which was reported on by most media nationally. So on average, they indicated that the growth in per pupil funding for schools was 2.8%, and that they were anticipating that school costs could rise to the tune of around 3.6%. But you're sharing a figure with us in this paper that refers to an increase in like-for-like per pupil funding of 0.8%. That appears to me to be well short of the anticipated costs as per the IFS release last week, which was widely reported. I'm just looking at this. I need your help here, Paul, perhaps, but there was a sharp intake of breath earlier, both when I read the paper and then when I saw the response to your response to my email earlier today. If I'm reading this correctly, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, I am very, very concerned in terms of budget planning ahead this year, and so should everybody else who is responsible for budget setting in schools. In 25-26, it's going to be even tougher.
Yeah, I mean, I've not got all the information that the Institute of Financial Studies have to do their comparisons. I'm aware of that publication as well. It doesn't fit in with the information we have at Bracknell for, if we're just looking at schools budget. I don't know if that includes funding they're anticipating for early years, for sixth forms, for high needs as well. I mean, this paper is purely focusing on statutory age pupils and the change in the funding rates that the DfE have published and provided to us for next financial year. So they've got, as I say, they've gone up by our funding rates, and they'll all be different authority by authority. Our funding rates, after you take account of that transfer of grant funding from the separate funding source into main school budgets now, so just shifting, that's no real impact on your budget if you move it in there, you're just not getting it from another income source, is a 0.8%.
Hey, Trudy, to you, please.
Sorry, Paul, I'm going to sound really dim here, but like Keith, I need it to be explained to me, because when I read the paper, I highlighted very happily in blue this positive 8% rise. And I naively thought, so I thought, oh, this is good. But then I potted back up to Jacinda, my school business manager, and said, oh, I did get really excited. But then I got a little bit deflated when I turned over and saw this 0.8. So where's it gone, basically, is what I want to ask, because that's what I don't get, if I'm honest. I don't know where the rest of it's gone.
I'm not sure what you mean by the rest of it, Trudy.
Well, so we had 8%. So on the front,
yes,
it's
okay,
we've got 8%. And I thought, great, that sounds absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Then when I carried on reading, it said about pupils' numbers have increased, which again is a positive. But then we got down to 2.5, which is what Keith was saying about. Overall, the final proposals presented the result in schools on average receiving an increase more like 0.8 pupil funding. So are those two things not the same? So the DfE have increased it by 8%, but then that doesn't transfer into this 0.8. I think that's where I'm confused.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Does that make sense, Paul? Sorry.
Yeah, it does. I'm not explaining it very well. So what we need to go back to how you're getting funded in 24-25 to start with.
Okay.
So your budget for 24-25 allocated money out that the DfE had committed to schools this time last year. And if you remember, during the course of the year in 24-25, the teachers' pensions went up 5%.
Yeah.
That wasn't included in your school budget that came out this time last year. And we also had a separate grant to pay for Teachers' Pay Award.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was a 5.5% cost increase from September. So there's overall, there's roughly a 7.2% increase in school costs in 24-25
Okay,
that wasn't included in your
now.
school budget that we gave you at the start of the year. So what's happening in the start of 25-26? That 7.2% of funding that was paid to you directly through a grant and not in your starting budget has now moved into your starting budget. So you've got the cash increase, but you were getting it in 24-25,
Anyway.
but just through a different, you're just getting it through a different rate. So it's not new money. So the new money is really the 0.2% and the 0.6%. Yeah.
Right, I do get it. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your patience.
All right.
Thank
No,
you.
that's fine.
Right. Other colleagues, any comments? Keith?
Yeah, thank you. I still need to digest this, Paul, because there'll be new costs as well. Is there more work that can be done on this to give us some?
Okay, yeah, I mean, we can have a look at the.
I need more reassurance or just more information. And probably on the former is wishful thinking. But
Yeah.
some more information.
Yeah.
I take the point. I understand what you're saying about where the money has come in from and the time at which we received it. But there's more costs ahead. We know that there's a recommendation for a pay award of 2.8%, for example, for this year, if it's upheld, and there'll be other increasing costs too.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I can go with the information that we've been given by the DfE into. We know what we got from the DfE last year in amount per pupil funding. We know what we're getting this year's per pupil funding, and we can do a very, very good estimate of what that impact of the transfer of the grant funding is. So I'm pretty clear that the information we've got is a 0.8% average increase in per pupil funding. What I don't know is how the Institute of Fiscal Studies have done their calculations. As I say, they might have used lots of other things. I've not had a time to look at any information to digest what they've done there, what assumptions they've got. I will make an effort to have a look at those sorts of that information, and I might be able to get some more information out of it, but I'm not sure where that will get to.
I guess it's when schools receive their indicative budgets that we'll very quickly have an idea as to exactly what it means for us. And is there an idea as to when we can expect to receive, or when schools can expect to receive?
Yeah, you should get it definitely by the end of hopefully next week, but it will definitely be before the end of January.
That is very helpful to us. Okay, Rachel, you have your hand up, please.
Yeah, just two things. Following on from what Keith said, looking forward to 25-26, obviously we know from experience that finances change, like the proposed pay increase for September. The government has said they're going to fund national insurance, but there's a pretty good chance that what they fund will not be what's being paid out fully. It'll probably be, moved from some other budget somewhere. So can we look at being a bit realistic going forward on not necessarily what figures are looking like now, but what we think they're going to be like? And the other thing is some of the confusion coming from the fact that the school finances are running from September to August, but that the financial year is April to April. So some funding crosses 2 years, doesn't it? And that messes up budgets, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're right. And I've had a very helpful comment from a colleague on the call here to say that, yeah, part of the uplift the Institute of Fiscal Studies are talking about is this extra full year effect that's coming in from the funding that's coming for the teachers' pay award for 24-25. So when you factor that in as well, you get much closer to the 2.2% that they are suggesting. But that's That's, I mean, yeah, so you were fully funded for those costs that you incurred in 24-25. So this, if that wasn't put in for 25-26, my take on that is that it wouldn't be a like for like comparison then, because you were fully funded for all those costs that came in from September. If you then don't get them only get them for the 7 months again in the next year, then you've got a funding gap there. So yeah, I mean that's a good point you made there, and that's as I said, that's backed up by a comment I've just received from a colleague. So thank you very much for that. What we'll do is, okay, what it might be useful is if we put a bit more information in the minutes when they come out about a cross reference to these other interpretations and these other publications about how the money has changed.
Be really helpful if it's possible when people get their budget potential summaries next week, the week after.
Yeah.
That'd be a really useful.
Yeah. Okay.
Rather than having to wait for the next forum. Any other colleagues want to make a comment? My one was, I'm delighted to see 2.32 separate funding provided to schools after the new financial year for employer contributions to the National Insurance Scheme. Thank you so much, everybody who campaigned for that, because that was personally going to be a difficult thing in my budget. And I really appreciate that money will mean that some staff members don't have to be lost within school structures. That was a real possibility in several schools, talking about the reduction, because obviously we want to increase the national insurance, but there has to be, we can't work on on thin air. So yeah, thank you very much. So any other comments from colleagues? No? Okay, quite a lot of recommendations, guys, and I'm going to try and just go through them a bit pithy. I won't read all the whole sentences, you'll be pleased. So we're going to go to 3.1. So we need to approve these. So 3.11A as schools block DSG. Some thumbs up and some. Excellent. Thank you, passed. Right, okay, 3.11B, School Central Services block. Thank you, passed. Right, so 3.11C. Paul, you're trying to make my head explode. Okay, 3.11 CIA. Voting on that one, please. Thank you. Right, 3.11 CIB. Thank you very much. Okay, 3.11 C2. Thank you. 3.12. Then we have 3.2 to approve the executive director be authorised to submit the DFE pro forma templates in accordance with the decision making in the meeting. Thank you. Right, 3.3 to approve. 3.31, the arrangements. Thank you. 3.32, the budgets, the growth fund. Lastly, 3.3 3.33, the budgets for the Central School Services. People vote again for 3.33. The budget's managed for Central School Services because I didn't see enough to pass us through the vote. Jamie, do you see enough to pass that vote?
I don't think so, no. We could do it in the chat just to get everyone's responses, if that would help.
Pop it in the chat for us and then we can hear yes or no. So well, it's Jamie's well pasting that one in. So the last one is to note the process to complete the proposals for high need block on there. So we're just going to ask people to put a written response next to 3.33. While Jamie's doing that, does anybody want to make any comments about their thoughts on the budget for Central School block if it is an area of contention? Here we go. So we've got 3.3 yes. Thank you, Trudy. Much appreciated. But yes. Yeah. Okay, so there's 4 above you, Jamie. Okay. I'll ask if anybody's disagreeing. It might just be. So we haven't got enough to pass that one. So if members aren't agreeing to approve for the decision making of 3.33 for the school central services block, and you haven't replied in the chat to Jamie, could anybody unmute and just tell me reasons and thoughts? No. Jamie, do we have enough now? Cool. While we're waiting for other people, what's the implications if we don't approve 3.33?
Well, we won't have fully set the budget for next year, so we do need. Well, if there's a no, we need to come up with an alternative anyway, because this is our this is the main meeting to agree the budget. Although it doesn't directly impact on individual schools' budgets, we could bring this one back in March, I would say off the top of my head. But obviously, it's not an ideal situation if we're bringing something back after everything else has sort of gone through the process.
I will say I've just done the maths of how many voters we have in here, and that, we've got four yeses, so that would be enough. And there's 7 eligible to vote, so that would be enough to pass it.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Okay, let's say that we approved, but only marginally. But I think I can hear the uneasiness that actually we need more information on a lot of these details, and the DfE need to know that there are elements that we're quite uneasy about with those costed pressures, and that's nothing to do with hard work the council have been doing. But we can't be left in limbo with difficult decisions like this, especially if we're saying, right, wonderful, all these grants are condensing, but it is new landscape for a lot of us, and it's made us feel uneasy about voting through the central services. Am I happy to say that, colleagues? I think that should be passed up, that we passed, but it has made us feel uneasy about sending and that's part of the work that we're doing with you, Dwayne, over the next few weeks, aren't we? So thank you. Okay, right. So if there is nothing else, let me just go up to the top because we've got all the papers. I just want to say thank you for all the papers prepared today by officers. But our next meeting is at 4:30, 13th of March. And it's a big thank you for everybody here and engaging today with some difficult issues. We know that what we discussed today will impact our children and our families. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for representing children. So stay safe and have a nice evening.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Liz. Bye.
Thank you, Liz. Bye-bye.